Hello and welcome to the Rogers Brief. I'm Adam Rogers. Thank you for watching and thank you for listening. This is day 20 of the Mass Casualty Commission proceedings, and I'm giving this report a little bit early. The day is still ongoing. Right now there is a cross-examination taking place for the first witness, Paul Mason, who's the Executive Director of the Nova Scotia Emergency Management Office. There's still one more witness, Rodney Legg, who is a technical advisor to EMO, who's going to testify after Mr. Mason. And so if anything happens with that testimony of significance, I'll try to catch up on it later, but I have to step out this afternoon to coach a ball practice, but then I have something else after that, so I won't be back until later tonight, and I wanted to make sure I got this video out before that if I could at all possibly do so. So today was, and I think most of the evidence, significant evidence of the day has probably already come in, and there's some very significant stuff that has happened already with the foundational document and with Paul Mason's direct evidence. The other thing I want to cover, and I started working on this yesterday, going back to the Heather O'Brien, the death of Heather O'Brien, and some of the contradictions between the testimony of Dwayne Ivany, Corporal Ivany, and Constable Ian Fahey. I've done a little more analysis of that, so I'll do a piece on that probably tomorrow. I'll have some analysis of those two positions and just go through a little bit about how I think a judge would normally assess the contrasting views of the situation with Miss O'Brien. We saw there was a big outburst at the time from the O'Brien family, and justifiably so in my view, at the hearings last week. And so I thought it might be important to dig into that evidence a little more. But before that'll be, I'll do that tomorrow. Today I want to talk a little bit more about the Alert Ready system, and the title I'm going to give this video is the Neither Alert Nor Quite Ready system. Because it certainly wasn't used in this case. It was fairly ready, although there were some issues there as well, which have been improved but not entirely resolved in my view. So this morning there was a foundational document presentation by Senior Commission Counsel Rachel Young, and she was talking about the Alert Ready software system, which is privately owned, but the CRTC, Canadian Radio and Telecommunications Commission, requires TV and cell phone broadcasters to cooperate and broadcast an emergency alert whenever it's required to do so, whenever it's the EMO office determines that it's a time to issue one. And it's designed to be used for many activities: natural disasters, floods, fires, such things, but also civil unrest, terrorist activities, and so certainly an active shooter situation, although not explicitly outlined in the long list of potential usages for the emergency alert, would certainly be included in the civil unrest or civil issues that could be used for. So one of the really interesting things that came out early on was that in going through the progression of this, because it's fairly new technology in some ways, just a little over 10 years old in Canada. But in 2016, so 4 years prior to the mass shooting, the Emergency Management Office had offered the RCMP, Cape Breton Regional Police, and the Halifax Police, so the three largest police departments in Nova Scotia, what's called trusted user status, which would have meant they would be able to make alerts directly without having to go through the Emergency Management Office. So now because the process is that the police or whoever is trying to originate the emergency alert contacts the EMO office and then coordinates the issuing of the emergency alert. Now, before 2020 and up to 2020, there was an 18, if you can believe that, 18-step process to have an alert issued. Right from the beginning of thinking about it, to contacting the EMO office, to drafting it, to having an approved draft, to all of these assessments of whether it's a true emergency. And well, if there's 18 steps in there, there's at least 15 steps too many in my view, particularly for a situation like this. You'll recall one of the things I think is an issue here, and I think it'll emerge probably a few other times, is the command structure of the RCMP, we heard Constable Stuart Brissell, first officer into Portapique that night of the 18th, suggesting early on, just after 11 p.m. on Saturday evening, that there should be an alert issued to the public or some notification to the public, but he didn't have the authority, the capability, or anything else to do so himself, even though had he had that authority and capability, a quick, hey, active shooter in the Portapique, Truro, Colchester, whatever, choose the area, stay indoors. Something very brief could have been issued by Constable Basselt or someone else, over the radio, do this, and get it out there quickly. But instead, there's this 18-step process where, how do you do that before the emergency's greater emergency or the emergency may have even passed? There's been some changes since 2020, but still there's probably too many steps involved. I told you in 2016 there was a presentation, and this was a presentation by Mr. Mason himself, if I understood his evidence correctly, to the RCMP and Halifax Regional Police that they would have direct access to the emergency alert system, but they declined to do so. They now do have that access, although it's still not crystal clear exactly what the procedure is internal to those organizations. So yeah, Paul Mason, like I said, he was the executive, or is the executive director of the Nova Scotia Emergency Management Office, and testified quite well, I thought. One of the things he mentioned was the reason why they think it was important for the RCMP and Halifax Regional and Cape Breton Regional Police to have this direct access. Other smaller forces as well, although they've declined this direct access, was because the Emergency Management Office is not staffed 24/7, as police, of course, are on duty 24/7. And secondly, they don't have what he called the situational awareness. So, like I say, both Stuart Basselt or other officers that were involved in this situation, Heidi Stevenson, in fact, thought an alert should have been issued as well. They're seeing what's happening on the ground. They're right there. It's in front of them, around them. And so they have more of an awareness of how serious the matter might be and can make that judgment call. So that was what the Emergency Management Office determined, those two reasons. First, the 24/7 access and the situational awareness should dictate who has control over and access to the emergency alert system. That was important. And the other thing he talked about, I wasn't sure he was going to get into this testimony. It seemed originally that he was just going to talk about the structure of the system. But he did talk a little bit about what happened on the morning of the 19th. He said emergency normally, and up until then, the procedure, such as it was that the police would contact emergency management. Emergency management would then have their process unfold and then issue or not issue the alert. In this case, nobody from the police had contacted EMO, but Mr. Mason had ensured that staff was present, had gone in because they heard through the media reports that something big was happening. Then when they saw the picture of the police cruiser, the mock cruiser on Twitter, knew that the killer was still at large, they contacted the police, or tried to contact the police to have the emergency alert issued. Were unsuccessful in doing so. And I know there's many questions outstanding now. The RCMP point person on the emergency alert, as I understood it, was Dustine Rodier, who was missing in action that morning. Unclear where Dustine Rodier may have been during that time, but couldn't be reached. EMO couldn't reach anybody to get, for a while, to try to coordinate an alert. And so, that's where the line of questioning kind of ended, as I understand it, and they may be talking about this more now in cross-examination and further examination, but there were a series of communications or attempted communications between the EMO office and the police to talk about this potential alert. And they were in the course of drafting and approving a draft when the killer was actually found and killed at the Big Stop. So none was ever issued. And so that was, a number of hours to coordinate that. But in her direct questions to Mr. Young, there was no breakdown of those attempted communications, which, it's one thing to say, hey, we tried to contact the RCMP but had no luck. It's another thing to lay out, here's the texts, here are the messages, here are the, and lay that out in some detail and some length to let it sit in with the people watching how much of an effort this was and how EMO was sort of perplexed by the lack of response by the RCMP and the lack of either awareness or consideration of issuing an emergency alert. So that was interesting. The other, I was curious as to why she didn't follow up with those kind of detailed questions. I think one thing Commission Counsel seems to be doing during their direct examinations is relying heavily on the foundational documents, presuming that we're all going to read them in detail, or maybe presuming we're not going to read them, but just saying, hey, they're in the documents. If you choose to go look at them, you will. But if you're just watching this like most people are, then you're not going to get that level of detail. So I think that's a deliberate choice on their part and the wrong choice. I don't think it suits the public interest very well at all. So the other thing I thought of interest today, so with each witness, and this was the case with Mr. Mason, and I was watching to see how this was going to be handled. With each previous witness, what would happen is the lawyers for the participants would go off and talk to one another with a commission counsel, at least one commission counsel in the room, monitoring the conversation, monitoring what questions and topics may be discussed. But then one lawyer comes out and asks the questions for everybody. And I'm sure that's a difficult process to reach agreement on all of those things, and then difficult for the lawyer asking the questions too, for all kinds of reasons. You're asking somebody else's questions. It's difficult. In this particular case, there's completely divergent interests among that group of lawyers who would have been caucusing. We know that the federal government is being very protective about this, talking about we've seen some articles where they tried to keep this part of the situation quiet. I think they're trying to undermine the usefulness and the technical capacity of the emergency alert system in order to try to show, well, it wouldn't have made a difference anyway. Of course it would have. So here you have the National Police Federation and the federal government lawyers on one side, no doubt pushing for one series of questions, a line of questioning, and then the Participants Council on the other side, no doubt pushing in completely the opposite direction. And so how do you have some one lawyer come out and ask those questions for both sides, essentially? Well, the real answer is you just don't. You just let both sides ask the questions, and we see who's asking what question, and we get to judge why and think about their perspectives. But instead, what the commission did was have Miss Young come back out and ask a series of questions, and then she said, well, if I miss anything, Miss McCullough, Sandra McCullough from Patterson Law, would come up and finish off anything that was left out. So what that told me was that the commission lawyer was prepared to ask the questions on behalf of the federal government, but perhaps not push so hard on behalf of the Participants Council and the questions they were seeking to have asked. I could be wrong. I wasn't in the room, of course, but that's my sense of it. Just watching things unfold and knowing the various interests of the parties and the lawyers involved. So I thought that was interesting. So that was it for today. The neither alert nor quite ready system seems to be improving. Seems to have a way to go yet. It seems like there should be more authority delegated down. This is another issue of trust. The question of, well, what if you issue alerts and the 911 system is overwhelmed, or there's civil unrest and panic because of some alert that's issued. Well, it was interesting because Mr. Mason was asked about just that, about how, during alerts that have been issued, have you noticed that the 911 system has been overwhelmed or anything of that nature? And he said, no, it has not happened. So the technical capacity is there. Usually there's enough people in there to answer the phones. Hasn't been an issue. So we can trust the citizens to react properly to an emergency alert. That seems to be the message coming from that answer. And so it seems logical then that a recommendation coming out of all this would be to delegate that authority down to as close to the ground level as possible for such emergencies as an active shooter situation. So we'll see what happens with the commission recommendations when they come in November, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's among them, or certainly it would be something I would certainly recommend to them. All right, so that's it for day 20. Like I say, if anything emerges from Rodney Legg's testimony, which I'll review later on today, then I'll try to include that in my commentary for tomorrow. There are proceedings tomorrow as well. I'll be watching those, and we'll come back with a report thereafter. So that's it for now. Again, thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.